Well, good morning, good afternoon again, depending on where you're calling in from. And thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, where we are going to be discussing how you can leverage WorkRelay as an app generator on the Salesforce platform, and specifically how you can build complex applications without convoluted or complex coding. My name is Kathleen Owen. I am the Director of Marketing at Canpango, and really am acting as host and MC for today's webinar. It is my pleasure to present our presenters and panelists, the real stars of the show, John Saper, who's the founder and CEO of WorkRelay, and will really be running us through just a brief description of what WorkRelay is. So we want to familiarize all of you who are online. More importantly, then, what are the customer advantages or the advantages to you as the customer if you were to use WorkRelay as a platform? We want to give some specific examples of how companies across a variety of industries are using WorkRelay to really streamline their operations. And then Ted Evangelakis, who's the VP of Product Services at WorkRelay, will be jumping into live product so we can make that experience a bit more tangible for you. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to John. The first is that between John and Ted, there really is a breadth and depth of knowledge, not only about the product, but about process management, project management, Salesforce development as well. And so we want to make sure that you get the most out of our time on the line together. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have. You can use the Q&A feature that's part of the webinar today. Also, we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the recording to all of you that are on the line. So look for that in the next 24 to 48 hours. And lastly, if there is anything that you would like to delve a little bit deeper into, something that catches your interest, Bailey Bintz, who is a product expert here at Canpango, is your point of contact. I have her email address there, and you can email her directly. So thank you again to all of you who are joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to learn more about WorkRelay. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick off the conversation about what WorkRelay is and the real advantages and value to the customers who are using it.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining us. So what is WorkRelay? WorkRelay is a rapid application development tool that allows you to develop complex applications in Salesforce without writing code. The key thing about WorkRelay is that it's not simply an extension of the raw power of Salesforce. Instead, it's a framework that has been established to rapidly create applications on the Salesforce platform without having to know a lot about the underlying Salesforce technology. Who it's aimed at. So what we found is that the people who have, the organizations that have to benefit most from WorkRelay are those that in companies that don't have access to developers or departments in large organizations that don't have access to developers, companies that want to reduce the burden on developers. They've got so much work to do for the developers, they don't have time to do all the applications, and they need to build Salesforce applications quickly. From a user point of view, it's primarily sysadmins and business analysts and power users who don't have necessarily the time or interest in becoming experts in Salesforce application development technology. So the main advantages here are that you, as someone who wants to develop a complex Salesforce application, do not need to know anything about Lightning, Apex. You don't need to get developers involved. You don't need to know anything about Salesforce flows, process builder, approval processes, workflow rules, all those different types of Salesforce technologies that you would normally be using. We've kind of replaced those with something much simpler, and you can do you can cover all the functionality that you need that is presented by those four Salesforce functionality pieces. So What do you get? You get a simple framework, a framework that's designed to allow you to develop applications very quickly. It brings everything into one place. You don't have to go to different screens or know different parts of the Salesforce platform. Everything is there in one place. It's easy to learn. You can learn it very quickly in a few hours to do 80% of what you're going to need to do, and the other 20% is easy to get from the WorkRelay Rapid Response team, who is kind of available on demand to help people develop the more complex applications. Some quick examples of what different companies have used WorkRelay for. In the retail area, we had a very large food franchise that had to install a new point of sale system across their thousands of stores, and they used WorkRelay to define the processes that are involved in doing that implementation, and it involved many different pieces, vendors and contractors and help teams, and just a lot of different things. The thing that was unique about this is that each process for each store needed to be tweaked to cover the specifics of requirements of that store, but they also needed to manage the whole implementation as a project. So one of the big advantages of WorkRelay is that in addition to being able to do process management and form design, you also get the ability to do project management. And everything is kind of united into a single database. So the process is reflected in the project plan, and there's only one place to make changes, and it's reflected throughout the system. So, if you ever have a situation where you want to take complex processes and manage them like projects, WorkRelay does that very well. And the media and marketing, an example here was a company that had about 100 different services that they offered their clients. The client could select which services they want, and WorkRelay will automatically create the end-to-end process required to provide those services, as well as provide the project timeline just at the click of a button. So very, very powerful in terms of mass customization of providing customized processes and projects for each individual client. Custom manufacturing, this is where the client needed to have an overlay, a process overlay that brought in tasks from multiple applications in their environment. So there was kind of one place where everybody got their tasks from and proceeded through the process from end to end. An energy client, they had a very complex approval process for vendors. It was a global approval process that had 15 or 16 different approvers across the world, many different conditions as to who had to do the approvals, and WorkRelay can do that extremely well. Next one is telecom. In this case, it's a company that does solar panel installations. Every installation requires a process. Each time it's executed, there might be different things that have to be done. So the system needs to be able to accommodate changes in the process as things happen. So you're not, closed in by what the process is when it's designed. You can make the adjustments as you go. Finance, onboarding new customers is a fairly common type of scenario for using WorkRelay. In healthcare, managing global clinical trials, this is a very complex type of environment where you have hundreds of projects running concurrently, each one with thousands of tasks across many different countries. And running for multiple years. So WorkRelay is capable of handling that level of complexity. And on the public sector side, this is more of a more simple example of where Work incidents happen and they have to be traced as it moves across the organization, picking up information from various places until the incident has been resolved. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the demo, and Ted is going to show you some various things. What we wanted to do in the demo is just give you some highlights of what it looks like to develop an application in WorkRelay. So we'll look at the process designer, we look at forms, approvals, some of the more complex, multi-level, long-running processes, the time dimension, and of course the real-time dashboards that we have. So let's turn it over to Ted.
All right, perfect. All right, so yeah, based on what John just went through, we're going to take a quick look at the process designer, which is a tool that we use to design processes in WorkRelay. And WorkRelay has multiple areas that can be used either in conjunction or alone. So for example, our processes can use our forms, our form designer, and forms can also be standalone and build form-based applications without the process component. In this case, we're going to take a look at the process designer. So basically, we use the swim lanes to define areas of responsibility. So in this particular process, we're looking at a POS system installation. This is similar to the example that John described with the franchise company. So we have users that are involved, with managing the store manager, the franchisee, for example, the main company's prime project manager, the vendor's project manager. So it's a fairly straightforward process that basically goes through doing a store survey, selecting equipment, approving equipment if it's over a certain amount, and then going into some web services to actually call external services to interact with, in this case, MuleSoft services to complete some of the back-end transaction processing. So in this case here, we have, in the swim lanes, we assign users to we assign from users or field values, any of the Salesforce group mechanisms. You can also do custom Apex. And even though we said that you don't need Apex to develop something in WorkRelay, you can use Apex if you have some custom logic that you'd like to integrate into a process application that you're building. So in this case here, you can see we have a couple of steps that I'm going to highlight in the front end. And so right now we're running a couple of different POS installations. And if I come over here to the front end and take a look, you'll see that I have a couple stores, store 2, store 1. And if I click on the Kanban card, and all the tasks that get assigned to users will appear in the Kanban card and also on the record view if you desire to work from the record view. So here you can click on a card, and that card will have a number of different options. For example, the default is that it's going to show me any forms that I've defined, and we'll dig into this form here in a second. But we also have information available like who's the assignee, what are the checklist items, if any, time entry, and other components like attaching files, looking at the audit history, for example. We can see what's happened in this process, when previous steps were completed, who completed them, any comments that they entered. So we have an entire audit mechanism built into the Kanban models here. So let's go back to the form. And on the forms, we have the ability to go full screen. So I'm going to do that. So from this schedule store form, I'm going to set an installation date. Let's say I'll do it for today. I'm going to say that the site survey is complete, and that will in turn, when we get to this step over here, when we move forward, this launches a conditional connector that'll skip some of the survey steps if that survey already exists. So we're basically saying that the survey exists. And now we want to dynamically select who's going to be the approver or approvers for this store. So here I can go ahead and start entering some values. Let's say I'm going to add this user. I'm going to do John. Add him. So now you're seeing that I'm building a list of approvers that is dynamic. Now this list can be dynamic in the sense that I add them in a form. It can also be dynamic in the sense that it can be query based and you can define the approvers based on certain parameters. Once these are set, we have these two approvers. When we get to the approval step later in the process, which is right over here, if it's over a $5,000 purchase, you can see that we have a custom icon here for this step. And what that means is that we have a custom responsibility override, which is going to look at a variable that we defined in that form we were just looking at called division managers. So when I complete this step right over here, all the people that are in the approvers list will be populated into a variable called division managers. And then when you get to that step, division managers will be assigned for that particular step, the approval. So let's go ahead and come down here and say, I'm going to proceed this, meaning I'm completed with that step. And after we go through a little bit of this part, I'm going to go into the form designer and show you how those forms are put together and what the different components are. So here we have a step now, validate installation date. We have another process running on store 2, and this is where we are going to pick the hardware that's available excuse me, that we're going to be installing into that store. So I'll expand this one as well. And this one's a little bit different. What we have here is we have at the bottom, we have a list of available equipment. And this is basically working off of the asset object in Salesforce. The primary process here is driven off of a custom object called store. So we can have our forms populated with data from multiple objects in different list views and nested forms, things like that. So in this particular form, we have the ability to filter the equipment. So let's say I want to look at just kits, for example. I'm going to say, okay, I just want to show kits, and it's going to filter this available equipment list. And I can select one of these items, and it's going to fill in my, my quantity selector right over here. So you can see it's filled in the SKU, the category, the price, and the quantity. And I'm going to say I want a quantity of 3. And if I apply now, it's going to take the that equipment and it's going to put it into my selected equipment. And that's another related list off of the store object. So we're adding these items. We're also tallying the total price here. So for example, let's add one more. And let's say we want a quantity of 2. We'll apply that, and it's going to now update the selected equipment with both of those values, and the total price is now going to escalate to $59.06. And we can also, by do a string match on the SKU. Once we do that, we can proceed the step, and based on the that custom connector that we saw right over here, this is moving to, actually, I'm sorry, select hardware is moving to this conditional connector, which says that if my total is over $5,000, this total is over $5,000, we're going to go to the approval step. If it's not over $5,000, we're going to go right to do the shipment of the equipment. So coming back here, oops. Yeah, we can see now that we have this approval step. And if I click on store 002, you can see that we have the 2 approvers. Remember, I added Ted and John as the approvers. And I've defined this step as it requires all the approvers to approve. So you can see down below here, as each approver approves the step, you can update, you'll see the status when they approved it, any comments they've entered, and so forth. And on the process itself, that step has a parameter that says assignees must approve. So that's what we're using to determine that everybody that's listed there has to approve. So when we proceed that step, if I approve it, it's going to come off of my dashboard view. But if I take a look at filter and include assignee, I do one for John. We'll see that he has the approve over $5,000 step there. And if we take a look at the approvers, we'll see that down here under majority proceed status, I've approved it on such and such a date, no comment. And now it's John's to approve. So let's go over now into the form designer to take a look at how we build these forms and how we do some of these form-based applications. So the form designer is right over here. Let's take a look at the hardware form. So on our forms, with the latest release of WorkRelay, the 2.0 series, we've introduced form events, which are basically on load, on click, various types of events that can trigger different types of functionality. And that's how all of the data is being shuffled between these list views here and being filtered based on parameters. All the actions for forms are available here under additional data. And you can see that we have a number of different options here that we can call some WorkRelay form functions like update value. We also have a concept of global action. And global action is similar to the actions that you find in our process designer. So for example, we have actions in the process designer that are called in the context of a step. But we also have those actions that can be run in the context of a form. So in this case, these forms can call these global actions. And in this case here, we have a global action called create store equipment. We're basically feeding it some variables. We're telling it which store it is. And then we're telling it what data we want to get back from that global action. So if we, when we run that, we're going to actually invoke this global action here, which is a create record action. And it's taking all the equipment that was added through that action where we moved it from the bottom to the top. And it's writing a record in the store equipment object, pulling in the variables for those virtual fields that we've just populated in the form. So that's what we're seeing right over here in this list, the selected equipment list. So that gets updated. When you click apply, it invokes the action that saves the record, refreshes this list with the new values that have been placed there. Other things that we have in the additional data, besides actions, we have variables. So we can set form variables, and forms can also work with variables that are passed through the process itself. So you have variables at the process level. Those variables can be passed to the form, and then you can also have variables at the form level, and those are valuable, let's say, in situations where your forms may not have may not be part of a process. On the other form we looked at, this is the schedule store form where we had the list of approvers, and we basically selected a user, moved it to the approvers list. And if you look at these lists, basically there's a series of list properties. And for example, here we have a condition. This list is on the user object. And under conditions, I can specify that all the user IDs in that list have to be in the variable that we've defined by adding users to that selection. So as you do add selected user, it adds it to the variable, and then this approvers list filters by users that are in that variable. So, and again, all these sections of the form have form events. So for example, when this list loads, we can specify some conditions, whether or not it should update, and then we can pull in the actions, which is like get the division managers, tell it it's the first time it loaded and all that. So it's kind of like a application development environment inside the form module here in WorkRelay. Next thing is we want to take a look at some standalone forms. And if I come over here to my home page, you'll see that I have, on the right-hand side, I have a form panel. And we have a number of different lightning widgets that can be incorporated into your page layouts. This particular one shows a form with a list of forms that match certain criteria. So in this case here, I'm going to launch a request, and this request is prior to the kickoff of a process. So this is a request that's going to kick off, in this case, a prior authorization and insurance process. So if I click on prior authorization requests, I'll go ahead and put in John's name here and some patient ID number. And you can fill in, physician's name, the request type, emergency, date of service, site of service. So all this information basically is used to kick off the request. And the same form could be made available through a force.com site so that users can kick off these requests through a web portal. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And what this will do is it'll save the form. It'll return to my Kanban view, and it will now show the first task in that process that was just kicked off based on the prior authorization request. So let's let it build here. So for example, here you can see the SAPR is the one we just did. So I can come over here. When I embed the WorkRelay Kanban in our in the home page or any other page, you can also expand it. So you can have the same kind of full screen experience. So we have SAPR here, and you can see that it's got the the basic information that I filled in, date of service, etc. And here I can enter some comments and either approve the prior authorization, or I can go into an investigate mode. And in this case, you would have a process that looks like this. This is the prior authorization process. So if they approve it, no authorization is required, we'll go right to the place order. Otherwise, we're going to go through a series of steps where we have to upload documents, and documents have to be reviewed by the the insurance provider and medical provider. And there's a number of different loopbacks based on number of approvals needed, and requirements based on the application itself. So basically at this point, if I approve it, I'm going to move on. I have to fill in, I have some checkbox fields here, checklist items. So I can say, okay, I did review the policy, I did review the guidelines. I'm going to save that and go ahead and approve it. And you can enter a comment here. Comments can be required or optional. So what that'll do essentially is it'll kick off, since I approved it, it goes right to the place order step for that record.
Hey, Ted.
Yes.
It's Kathleen just jumping in here, and it looks like we do have a couple of questions that are coming in. It's clear that WorkRelay can really be used in an extremely flexible way, which also means that it has very robust feature sets and capabilities. Some of the questions that are coming in, and actually I may have Bailey or even John answer this question as well, is, how technical does a team have to be? So in order to really operate with all of this, it looks like based on the poll and the questions that we asked in the beginning, we have a lot more Salesforce admins on the line and people other roles that aren't actual developers. So Bailey or John or Ted, could you maybe address that in how technical a team really has to be in order to leverage the robust feature sets?
Sure. So as you can see in a lot of the, the form components and in the process designer, building a process is drag and drop pretty much, and then you can add, things like database updates and email actions, and same thing with the forms. The forms are essentially drag and drop. We can click on the form name, bring over fields from the object, from lookups on the object. So all that would be familiar to a Salesforce admin, even some of the more complex items like jockeying data back and forth between lists doesn't require a programmer per se, but it would require some familiarity with let's say Salesforce formula fields and how those are structured. And maybe a little bit of education on the syntax of our form events, like the onload event and on-click event.
Okay, great, thank you. And Bailey, who's also our product expert and an account executive at Canpango. I mean, Bailey, you talk with a lot of people in a variety of industries, but also a variety of roles as well. Some more technical, some less. Is that something you can address from your perspective in the conversations that you have?
Yes, absolutely. So just to reiterate what Ted said, there is obviously a lot of overlap with folks who are familiar with Salesforce from the admin perspective. A lot of this interface is very similar to what you'd be working with from just the straight Salesforce standalone platform. However, if your team is less technical and you are looking for assistance with these kinds of resources, we absolutely have internal resources with WorkRelay to help stand up these the WorkRelay processes for you. And we're happy to sort of decide on a length of handholding, trading, implementation, depending on your specific business needs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If there's any further questions that anyone has about that, feel free to continue to put those in the chat or in the Q&A as well. So Pat, I'll go ahead, turn it back over to you so we can wrap up the demo here in the next few minutes and then open it up for Q&A.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to flip over to a couple other pieces just to show you the timeline perspective. So we talked about, where is it here? Oh, I need to, sorry. So as an example, we have multiple stores that are being run through right now, and we want to visualize all of those stores related to a particular account. So we have a concept on the process side called connection points. And what this does is allows us to look at a Gantt view that will show all of those processes rolled up into a single timeline view. And this Gantt here, for example, you can see as I expand it, these are the installations for the different stores that we have going on right now. I can expand the stores and I can see what the Gantt looks like in terms of right now this is actual, so it's showing me that I've completed all these steps, but then these future states are shown by these gray boxes. And as I expand these, you can see there are different ones that are in different state of completion. Gantt can also be edited, so if you're a project manager and you are working on a particular project, you can go into the edit mode of the Gantt view, and for example, I'll take one of these, and let's say push it to the 28th. We have in our Gantt we have a number of different recalculation modes, and we have a whole algorithm builder for recalculating dates if you want it. The default is that it'll recalculate the successors, which is what I want to do here. And now you can see that all these orange lines indicate that we've just updated the planned start dates for these particular steps. So all that can be done, and then these will drive the the due dates that are shown to the user when the task is assigned. So let me hop out of this a second. And what I wanted to show you next is kind of a more realistic example. This is based on one of our customers that does long-running processes that are based on compliance. So they have third parties that have to go through a compliance process. They gather data. As part of that process, they also have to go through an approval process. So this is basically, there's the parent process, which is right over here, where they gather the data, they enter some information. We actually track different parts of the application automatically. So as they finish entering certain pieces of data, we can indicate that these various sub-steps are done and be able to give them a progress update. But what happens when they go to the approval is that based on a number of factors, they can dynamically select the approval sequence based on, for example, something like, what type of agent it is. It's an agent. Is it a salesperson? Is it something like that? So these will basically work on, the type of data it is, the risk level of a step in particular, something like this, where some of these, for example, this one here, where the risk rank is not equal to high. So you can have a multiple variety of factors that'll play into the sequencing of these approvals steps. So some processes may have 6 approvers, some may have 15, based on the complexity. And adding to that potential complexity is the fact that there might be several locations that need to approve this person. And each of those locations may have their own approver. So we use our variables to specify the number of approvers, and then those variables get set over here. And then it follows a scenario like you saw in that example where we have the multiple approvers required before. But those are assigned dynamically based on the number of offices that need to approve this particular step.
Right. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that we're getting some more questions coming in. I'm kind of seeing a trend in the questions. And this may be John would want to jump in on, or Bailey too, because I have some different perspectives. But essentially, again, the functionality is robust. Clear that businesses in a variety of industries are able to use this and customize. John, could you just take a step back, John, and make in some examples kind of what are some of the main values that you see WorkRelay customers attributing to this robust feature set and the flexibility and the agility of the platform? So we do have some more technical listeners on the line, but we also, I think, have some that maybe are more business owners. Is that something that you could speak to, is just like, let's take a step back and attribute the values and the things that you're hearing, kind of the so what's behind all this robust functionality? Sure.
Sure. So what we found with our clients is that they are able to use business analysts or more advanced system admins to develop really complex applications by using WorkRelay to initially, the thing about WorkRelay is it's very easy to create an application quickly until you get to, obviously, parts that are maybe unique to your organization. And that's where we come in. We can kind of help you get through that. But it also eliminates the need for you, if you run into a unique situation where you can't do it, just through normal WorkRelay, you don't have to go to developers. You basically could come to the WorkRelay team, and we'll help you kind of get that that unique functionality implemented within the WorkRelay framework. So,
and when you're speaking with like even if we take a little bit higher view, again, just making sure that we're answering some of the questions that are coming in, what does that mean for business outcomes? From a functionality standpoint, it makes it easier. Does it mean faster speed to market? Is it agility in responding to shifts in things that are happening in business operations? Can you speak to
sure.
Business outcome standpoint, what does all this mean?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, clearly you can develop applications on the Salesforce platform a lot faster than if you were doing it even in point and click technology within Salesforce itself, but certainly well beyond getting developers involved. One of the most important parts that we've seen is that companies can adjust their applications very quickly. So when things change, you don't have to go back to the developers and they have to go through their whole life cycle before they make any changes and do the implementation. So the robustness of WorkRelay, in addition to getting something up and running fast, is that you can make changes very, very quickly. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we've seen, companies come back to us with and say, it gives them much more flexibility. They can adapt to changing circumstances much faster, and so on.
Great, thank you. Bailey, anything that you'd add to that based on your perspective and the conversations that you have with customers and prospective customers?
No, I think John and Ted have hit it on the head this entire webinar. So really happy with that. Kathleen, was there something specific that came up in the questions that you'd like me to address here?
Just wanted to make sure, figured since we have all the panelists on the line, we could have an open discussion. So I'll go and turn it back over to you, Ted, and to wrap up the portion here.
Okay. Yeah, so the last piece that I wanted to kind of talk about is some of the dashboarding, and this is an example of our workflow progress dashboards, where you can look at all the instances of a particular process that are running, and see where you are based on this color code. So, for example, the green ones are done, the red ones are late, the blue ones are waiting on some other step to be finished, and the gray ones are ones that haven't been invoked yet. So with this view, we have the ability to filter. You can create these progress dashboards that include multiple fields. Right now, this just has the opportunity name and the account name, but you can add additional fields there. And then once you do that, you have the ability to filter both by process-oriented information as well as by data from the object. So you can see account ID here. So if I went to Acme, very popular, you'll see that I can filter all the view there by Acme account. So basically, and then this also allows you to expand and collapse the sub-processes that are running. So if you have a long-running process that has embedded sub-processes, you can choose to hide or collapse those. The other piece I wanted to show relating to data is that all the data that's resident in the WorkRelay objects as you run processes, that's all available for reporting in Salesforce. And what you're seeing here is this is a wave analytics dashboard, but it could be regular reports and dashboards. And you can see things like the average, minimum, maximum, average time for steps to complete, how many processes are running. You can see number of instances by customers, total time to complete. So all of these metrics are available out of the box because all of the objects are in our managed package. And you can even extend our objects by adding lookups to your data sources so that, for example, you can create reports that combine opportunity or your custom object data with the process data that's coming out of WorkRelay, and be able to look at, let's say, for particular accounts, how long are these processes taking, be able to build some analytics, and eventually you can use like predictive type of tools like Einstein to analyze the data as well. So I think that that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover.
Great. Thank you so much for the in-depth demo. The only other question that I see that's been hanging out in chat, John, this may be something you, or again, Bailey, if you're able, but is just around free trials. I was able to test this out with the team. Is there any sort of method for doing that?
Yeah, sure. So anybody who's interested in doing a free trial, we just let us know, and we'll set up a sandbox for you, and help you get started, and do a proof of concept if you're interested in. So yeah, absolutely. Just let us know, and we can help you out. Okay,
great. Ted, if you wouldn't mind, real quick, if you would stop sharing, then yeah, go ahead and share. Just to get Bailey's contact information back there so that everybody has that information. So that back up. And if there are any other questions, people can go right ahead and enter those into the chat, the Q&A. Like we got quite a few of them answered during the webinar. You can see Bailey's email address, also her direct line are on there if you want to look at something a bit more in depth. It doesn't look like we have any other questions in the chat or the Q&A. So take a, or just keep an eye out for some emails that will come from Bailey with the webinar recording. We also have just some really high value content as well. We're going to be out to you to kind of help support the things that we discussed today on the webinar. So thank you to everybody who took the time to join us, and please reach out if you have any sort of question, want to take a deeper dive. Everyone have a great afternoon.